Thank you very much to everyone watching. Thanks to all of y'all for being here. And thanks to Grassroots North Shore. Also, congrats on the office. I haven't been here since the move. It's fantastic. And thanks for all the great work you do. And thanks to Keith for inviting me.
Yep.
I think it's a really good idea as far as a series of events to do. And I actually do have a suggestion for one coming up. I was thinking as you were talking that it might be fun to do one on wetlands and the wetlands destruction bill that was just advanced, which I can provide a lot of information on that as the ranking member on that committee, but yeah, that's a pretty big one, and the implications are pretty significant. So,
and I think that one's probably could be a little arcane for people, but there are some really hard facts about it that people should know.
Yeah, and so but tonight we're here to talk about the FoxConn, and you know, what's interesting is I walked in, Keith said, "Wow, you're really a big fan of UWM. You love your school. You went and, I'm wearing my UWM tie, more so as a way to emphasize what a real economic investment in our community and our state could look like, and where the ROI actually is versus the shenanigans of FoxConn, and how this kind of fake paradigm that we've been put into creates not a lot of real incentive. So I'm going to start off by reading an early editorial that I wrote. I'm going to read a little part of it, and I think it kind of sets the tone for our discussion tonight. Then I'm going to go through a couple of the kind of bigger myths as well as their kind of counterweight facts, and then I'll say a couple closing remarks, and then I want to hear from you all if there's anything more specifically that I haven't covered that you'd like me to talk about. Sound good? Okay, and let's begin. So when this first started off, the whole thing smelled pretty rotten to me, and there was a couple red flags right away, including the initial language that we got around the bill. It was written very loosely, is probably the nice way to put it, but there was a lot of red flags, such as the clawback provisions were mays instead of shalls, things like that that are pretty clear indicators something weird's going on.
What?
Yeah, so I came out with an editorial early on, and in the second paragraph I wrote, when approaching something like this, it's important to look at who we're dealing with, who's at the table. So we have Scott Walker, we have the FoxConn CEO, Terry Go, and we have Donald Trump. So first we have Walker, a politician whose credibility on jobs is seriously lacking. Remember, this is the same guy who lied about creating 250,000 jobs in his first term, and who created one of the most corrupt institutions in recent state history, WEDC, what's known as the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, or colloquially as the Walker Economic Devastation Corporation. So that's strike one. We also have the FoxConn. This is the same company that lied about the factory they're going to set up in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Had to set up suicide nets at their Shenzhen factory because people are literally jumping out to try and commit suicide, and lied in India, lied in Brazil, etc., etc. Strike two. Finally, we have Trump, who lies every time he opens his mouth, pretty much. So strike three. These are the three entities we were dealing with when when the deal was first being approached, and any one of them should be a pretty big red flag. But the myth, was that these three folks could come together and come up with something good. The fact is, they lie through their teeth constantly, and especially when it comes to economic development and things of this nature, they all have a horrible track record. And I mean, it was right after the Carrier situation, if you all remember that, where we gave all this money and then they used it to automate the factory and get rid of the jobs anyway, when, Trump took credit for it. Do you guys remember that?
Yeah, I'm still going to Mexico.
Exactly, and it just happened to be the timing of this was right around then, so it was just kind of a perfect case in point. But right away, this whole deal was filled with all sorts of grand promises, and it's kind of a Music Man context, and for people who might be a younger generation, remember the Simpsons episode, the monorail episode. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
It was kind of one of those deals. So it's this great promises, pie in the sky stuff being offered, but when you start to look into the details, you figured out that this was a terrible deal, possibly the worst deal in state history. and maybe one of the worst deals that will go down in our nation's history. But that's not what they wanted. They wanted to rush things along. They had a lot of external pressure points. They said, "We have to get it done by this time." That was a myth. The reality was there was no timeline on it. In fact, Terry Go didn't even say there was a timeline. They built this artificial time frame so that we would, have more pressure as a legislature. But there was no time frame for it that we needed to do it under. There was also a myth about, that if we don't create these jobs, we're going to be devastated economically, and there's, that we're not going to be able to recover as a state, and they're going to look these other places, when in reality, investments like this, basically bribing a corporation to come here, is not good economic investment. There's not good ROI. In fact, we have much better options like investing in our public university system, which has a known rate of a 15 to 1% return on economic activity development. So, so that's where we begin. There's a couple pretty specific myths that were quoted in the papers or in the media or other outlets I'm going to go over, and then I'm going to talk about a few other kind of ones that just come to mind. We developed a couple of these. I just thought that were kind of some of the most outrageous and most impactful when they were being initially talked about when the deal was being voted on. So, Walker said that FoxConn is bringing 13,000 high-tech jobs to Wisconsin. The fact is, the company itself has been quite a bit, even in their initial estimations, more measured in how they approached it. And they said, well, it'll create 3,000 jobs with the potential to grow 13,000 new jobs. It's a pretty big discrepancy, especially when you're talking about the direct jobs, where Walker said, well, then all the indirect jobs are coming from. So if you're using it as a multiplier effect in your calculation and your estimation, being off by 10,000 jobs is a pretty big deal. We have a couple other people disproving this. We had Hart Posen, who's an associate professor of management human resources at the W School of Business, and he said he didn't expect a plant like this, given the company's numbers, to actually have a lot of jobs employing people. In fact, he thought there's going to be a lot of automation associated with this, and a lot of those jobs are not going to be, hiring locals or even people from Illinois. A lot of the jobs are going to be robots. And in fact, we see that that's kind of one of the things that the CEO, Terry Go himself, has said. They want to be a world leader in automation. And he's stated that publicly multiple times. We also have another professor, Christopher Ballwing, who's a professor at Peking University, and he said that it fits with FoxConn's strategy, this sort of effort towards countering rising labor costs and transportation costs related to China. Meaning, basically, this, if you remember, this was in the context of a lot of hostilities. There's still some hostilities, but at that time this was kind of a lot of talk, and with our president saying, in his very strange accent, China, 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 we're going to get this trade war, we're going to escalate, and even Paul Ryan, talked about kind of escalating the tariffs and escalating this trade war that some economists and some foreign leaders thought was, kind of a natural extension of this presidency. So the FoxConn was kind of a way of hedging the bets. If Wisconsin's going to pay for it anyway, and if we're going to cover the risk, why not put a factor here? And if there is something that comes up, it's not about shipping costs or anything like that. It's not about labor costs. It's not about that he loves the Wisconsin labor force. If there is a significant trade war that ensues between China and America, he's good to go either way. It's a way to hedge the bets. And he can keep his Shenzhen plant open, but we also have this other plant in America that he's good with. So that's another aspect to it. And then we have professors from Cornell University and other places saying that basically this company is taking their steps towards investing in robotics, which as wages started to rise in China, which has been going on with industrialization, that was the way of countering it. And we've already seen significant automation with this company in particular. And again, this is more steps towards automation. And last but not least, FoxConn is not guaranteeing how many people they would hire, or how long they would hire them for, or even what their pay was. In fact, when the legislature tried to get their breakdown of what the salary structure would be, they did not offer it as, I mean, they don't have to, it's a private company, but given that we're subsidizing them with, at that time, and I'll get into this later, $2.85 billion, we should, I would say, if we're going to do business on, have access to what they're planning to do with that money, but of course did not provide that. In fact, they really were pretty loose in not providing a lot of their information. So it means that theoretically, the company could earn up to, at that time, $1.35 billion in investment incentives and not really employ anyone for long term. And if it built a factory but never operated, if that trade war didn't come to be, we're just left high and dry, subsidizing and taking on the risk of this private entity. So again, this is one of the biggest myths. Is Walker kept talking about this as a sure deal, and Wiedeck's in charge, and we got all the experts saying it, when the reality was, the truth of it was, this is a horrible deal as far as speculating on it. If you're betting on this, the odds are, you better get really good odds, because it's significantly in the House's favor, and the idea that we're going to see some sort of ROI on this, if it's not going to people from other states, it's not going to, Chinese labor that they're bringing over here, if it's not going to just not get open in the first place, it's going to robots. So at every level, kind of pokes holes in that argument, and and this is not just, a Democratic strategist or anyone else in it. These are the experts in economics from many different disciplines, and experts in these sorts of deals. So another myth that was presented to us when this deal was beginning was that the project will support 10,000 construction jobs over each of the next 4 years, as well as 6,000 indirect jobs from the construction. So a total of 16,000 jobs, and that was based off of there are two different studies. There was the Ernst & Young study and the Baker-Tilly report that were done. One was by Wiedeck, one was by FoxConn. So the 10,000 construction jobs figures reported in both studies, but it's exceedingly likely that a high percentage of these jobs are actually going to be outsourced to other states. So if these jobs do come through, it's not Wisconsin workers. We've already seen contracts going to other states on this deal already for those construction jobs, right? And according to Baker-Tilly's own, and that was the pro-FoxConn report, a conservative estimate of the worker base assumes that 40 to 50% of these will not be Wisconsin residents. So, you'd say, well, we're creating all these jobs, and we're gonna. And he even had a statewide tour where he went to Appleton, he went to the Fox Valley, he went to Appleton, he went to Eau Claire, he went all over the state. He said, these are going to be your people hiring. We're going to contract through the WOW counties and Waukesha, Ozaki. We're going to hire all of your people. 10,000 jobs, 6,000 jobs. When the reality was, it ain't coming here. It's going all over, and we're not benefiting from it. So again, it's a way to siphon our money, as opposed to something like university investments. We're siphoning our money out of Wisconsin and into other pockets. So by the figures that their own report showed, at most, Wisconsin might gain about 5,000 to 6,000 construction jobs, while the neighboring states are, again, being subsidized with our tax dollars with the rest of those jobs, given the scale and scope of the campus that they're talking about for FoxConn. So there's also a pretty big environmental component to this whole deal, and that's a whole, that could be a whole discussion on its own, but one of the big environmental components, and actually, again, one of the myths was we have the pressure. We have to make the deal with them. We're under the gun, and we have an artificial timeline that they created, and they're going to go somewhere else, and this and that. When the reality was, I think they needed Wisconsin because of our water access, because of our access to the lake. And the amount for this sort of processing of these screens that this particular industry does, it's very water intensive, and that's the reality of the nature of that work. But given that, Walker and the Republicans kept saying that a lot of the water is going to be returned and treated to the lake, and this is about 875 tanker trucks per day is how much water they use. When the fact is, as we learned from Cheryl Nin of the Milwaukee Waterkeeper, one of the experts of Wisconsin, kind of water usage, that it's actually close to 7 million gallons of water, and only about 60% of that is going to be treated and returned to the lake, and the rest would be consumed in the manufacturing process. And again, we see this in other plants. We've seen what's happened in their Chinese plants and what happened with the water out there and with the surrounding villages that are kind of downstream. So again, we have a significant amount of fresh water here. The largest freshwater system on the planet is in the Great Lakes, 90% of America's fresh water. And the diversion of 7 million gallons of water a day to this private company is not only completely unprecedented, but quite dangerous. And the reality is, we're giving up for what? So that this company, which may or may not even operate, which may operate in the way they said they would, may or may not create the jobs, the economic investments it would, can operate, do their thing, and then what are we left with after that, and what's going to be the outcome for us? So we do have one hope there, which is, there's still efforts being made as far as the Great Lakes Compact, which is a multi-state, well, it's multi-state and Canada, bipartisan effort created to protect the lakes from depletion. And again, FoxConn kind of undercuts that, so we'll see how that plays out. But that's a pretty significant deal, and again, why did they have to locate in Wisconsin? Why are they talking about in the Midwest? Is it just because of our access to Chicago and stuff like that? No, a lot of it is because of our water. Moving on, one other myth I want to get to is, Governor Walker kept breaking his arm on his back, talking about how WEDC should be applauded for crafting such a great deal in this, monumental investment in Wisconsin, is what he said. When truly, FoxConn's at that point $2.85 billion in tax credits accounted for 96% of the tax credits that the state awarded in these deals, but only would, if everything works out the way it said it would, produce 44% of the jobs. So even by their own metrics, it's actually a horrible deal. This was something that, even if we give the Rosie's predictions, use their study, give everything that they've asked for, it still doesn't produce a very good deal. In fact, it's one of the, and again, remember this is WEDC, which screws up deals of a couple $100,000, and has been scandal since its inception, let alone something of this nature. So, so really, should they be applauded? The truth is, they should have been laughed out of the room when this deal was put in front of them. This should have never gone through. Also on the environmental side of it, we had the kind of strange permitting process. And so, well, we need this to operate. We have to make it as easy as possible. Government out of the way, get our protections for our environment out of the way, make sure that this is as easy for the FoxConn as possible. So Republican, at that point she was a state senator, obviously she's no longer a senator, but Sheila Harsdorf made the following statements regarding FoxConn's environmental impacts. While the permitting process for environmental regulations will be streamlined, no changes have been made to air, water, or waste-related standards. By the way, bonus question, does anyone know what Sheila Harsdorf is doing now?
No.
She's the head of the EPA Region 5 office.
No, that's Kathy Stepp.
Yeah. So she's taken Kathy Stepp's.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And she's making these statements. What a coincidence.
Point of order on this. Sheila Harsdorf's district is way in the northwest corner of Wisconsin. What sort of benefit is Sheila Harsdorf's district going to get out of it?
Well, you're jumping ahead.
Oh, well, keep our finger in that place, yeah.
So we're going to get to that. Keith raised a really good question. We're going to get to that later, but you're right. So Kathy Stepp, Sheila Harsdorf. So, it's kind of funny, given these statements, what she's in charge of, but just an aside. And she was saying that a more restrictive 2-to-1 acre mitigation ratio for the impacted wetlands will go beyond. So what she's talking about is basically they can just completely fill, dredge, get rid of all these wetlands. And of course, as we know, once these wetlands are done, they're done. And she's saying, well, we can replace them, and we're going to mitigate the loss of these wetlands. But the reality is not all wetlands are created equal. And especially in that region of the state, does anyone remember, like, right, exactly, yep, on the nose, the flooding. And you know, even the amount of like quote unquote 100-year floods we've experienced over the last decade and a half, you know, so these wetlands provide incredibly important functional mitigation for that flooding, which if they're filled with concrete, you know, we do not have. And it's interesting because that area in particular is incredibly benefited by the mitigation for flooding, as especially we've seen, you know, as you mentioned.
That's what devastated Houston too, was the fact that development took away the wetlands, and the water had no place to go. And
water finds a way, and it's going to, you know, if there's not a spongy wetland area to soak it up, it's going to be quite devastating. And of course, anyone here can imagine, you know, what's sort of damage that, you know, not just to your home, but you know, your business, your family, your whole livelihood. So so that's what we're talking about. Not only that, but it also in some areas creates important habitat for a lot of the little critters around the state. So again, just because there are wetlands being created in other places and they're being displaced does not actually solve the problem that they're creating. Not all wetlands are created equal. That's the reality. And a lot of the wetlands that they could be talking about might have incredibly important levels. Some, you know, some have very little functionality, some have much higher. But when you're talking about flooding, when you're talking about habitat, and you're talking about cleaning water sources, some of these wetlands, once they're done, and you can't go back. And obviously, they are created through the glacial history of our state, and So anyway. So that's a pretty important one because the environmental component kind of got, you know, it in some minds I think kind of paled in comparison to the ridiculous amount of subsidies, the billions of dollars of subsidies, basically $3 billion we're talking about. And we should caution ourselves when thinking about this deal because the environmental component is a huge deal. And not only that, but it set the precedent for the wetlands destruction bill to go statewide, which Representative Jarkow referenced when he was making his floor statements on it during the vote. So one other quick, you know, myth that's... Actually, I'll wait till the end on that one. I'm going to get through these and then I'm going to say my final one of these I think is really important. Let's see. Well, one of the things that they kept talking about was how amazing it is to have this technology, how it's clean technology, and you know this is there'll be no bad environmental effects. And even though we're circumventing the courts and we're not having an environmental impact statement and we're destroying the wetlands, even though we're getting rid of all these protections for our environment, don't worry because this is a really good company. And they don't harm the environment, and they have our best interests in mind. Terry Gold loves Wisconsin. He even shook Walker's hand in Wisconsin and took this photo op and stuff like that.
No one commits suicide.
Is, there is a cacophony of studies that highlight the danger of this sort of manufacturing, the LCD manufacturing. And if you look at other areas where they operate, there's significant harm to the human populations around there. According to the Yale School of Forestry Environmental Studies, patterns of high instances of leukemia, lymphoma, brain cancer, and other serious diseases appear in young working adults in factories, including LCDs and these semiconductor plants. And in addition, 2014 study showed that chemicals used in these LCD plants have really negative effects on aquatic organisms, which can completely throw those ecosystems out of whack. So the big thing to keep in mind is, it's called NF3, nitrogen trifluoride, which is a chemical used in LCD production, and it has a global warming potential of 17,200 times that of CO2, and over a 100-year period can stay in the atmosphere for around, that of CO2 over a 100-year period, excuse me, and can stay in the atmosphere for around 500 years. And this is something that's right now fundamental to this sort of processing. So again, this is not a super safe industry that, and probably the reason why they're asking for getting rid of, the court, circumventing the courts on this, getting rid of the environmental impact statements, the wetlands, everything else, is because they want to do harm to us, and those protections might get in the way of this sort of processing. So really, when we get rid of these protections, it's not because Walker's saying, oh, we got to get rid of the red tape, we're under a timeline, da-da-da. That was a smokescreen to execute this sort of terrible policy, but it really puts Wisconsinites at risk because of the nature of this manufacturing, of the LCD manufacturing that they're talking about. So, one other kind of key myth that kept coming up over and over and over was these jobs are going to have an average salary of $53,875 plus benefits. So, do you guys remember there's a famous politician, Bill Clinton, says, it depends on what the definition of is.
Yeah.
Remember that? Well, in this case, do you remember like average, median, medium? Remember, it could be different terms. It could all go different ways. As one of my colleagues, jokes around. I have a colleague from the Janesville area, Deb Colsty, Representative Colsty, and she says, he says if Bill Gates walks into our local bar, the average wage becomes $1 million. We're all millionaires. So again, are they talking about what their highest wage earners are going to be making? Are they talking about the robots and how that factors into it, and the lowest wage workers? So truly, any job, the way that this deal is worked out, that pays at least $30,000 would qualify for the state incentives. And again, they did not show us what their structures were for hiring, so the only requirement is actually $30,000 a year, not these $53,875 plus benefits jobs. It was $30,000 a year, and that's where the incentives kicked in. So again, where it goes into, and I have some other kind of specifics on here that I could outline, but given the timing and how long this has taken already, I'd rather just kind of go into the next phase of this and then get into questions with you all. There's two pretty large myths that have to do with the FoxConn in specific that I think are important to consider. That are really the overarching ones. One was the cost, and myself, as you can read my statements that I've made and everything else, that I called it right away. $3 billion is a ridiculous amount to funnel into one company and use 96% of our economic development tools for one company that has a really bad track record, that has a CEO who has literally compared their labor force to animals and said he has to get a zookeeper to know how to manage these animals and stuff like that.
Wow.
Yeah, Terry Go, you can Google. In fact, I believe the Journal Sentinel wrote a piece on that.
How do you spell his last name?
G-O-U. Right? So
He stalked one of his employees. Yeah, I have his name.
Yeah, so basically the idea that we're funneling all this money in and kind of pushing it towards one opportunity for economic investment, and this is the way to do this, is basically bribe a company coming. That's not economic investment. That was the myth. And that's something that's happening over and over and over. Governments are not in the business, and should not be, or are, but should not be in the business of bribing a private company that we don't get shares in to try and come here, because again, when you do that, you're not developing economic growth. What you're doing is you're bribing someone, and their loyalty is to that bribe. Meaning, someone else could say, hey, we're going to give you $5 billion, why don't you come over here? Or they could say, you know what, we really like you guys, but you didn't give us enough, and we're going to leverage it for more. So the myth was this is going to be $2.85 billion. Now with all the costs associated to the state, we're up to $4.5 billion. So the worst deal, is any Star Wars fans? Star Wars fans?
Sure. Yeah.
Like, talk, Lando covers, Darth Vader, this deal keeps getting worse all the time.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of those moments. It's not just the environmental side is getting worse, not just, their lack of coming through on the contracts for Wisconsinites, not just Wisconsinites not being hired in general, not just the automation, but also we're having to subsidize even more, and we're on the hook. And Another big myth about this was that they're just foregoing potential revenue to the state. Because of the man and egg tax credit, they're not basically paying any taxes. They wouldn't be on the hook for any taxes. They don't pay anything. That's already a done deal. What they got was refundable tax credits, which is a weird, like, I don't know why that's the term for it, but that's the state term in our statutes. Refundable tax credits, meaning the state of Wisconsin, not only are they foregoing potential tax revenues to the state of Wisconsin, but the state of Wisconsin has to write them a check, literally year after year, to pay them off to be here. So the myth is, well, we have to bribe these people to come here for this economic development. The reality is, true economic development comes from investing in your public schools, investing in your university system. Anyone hear of Silicon Valley?
Yeah.
You know how that came to be? Because they had a great university system and a lot of great intellectual capital that was developed, and there was a critical mass that came together and said, you know what, this is where we want to locate because we have a feeder system. If you think about here in Wisconsin, we have an amazing healthcare technology plan, right? Called, for bonus points out of Madison? Epic.
Epic, yeah.
And Epic is right by
UW Madison, yeah.
And they have a great feeder system, and that's true economic development. And when Google came to Madison, what did they say? You know, they put out the statement they love the public schools, or they love the transit system, or they love the parks and quality of life. That's how you build real economic development. That's what government should be in the business of.
Not to mention the west side of Madison, the technology park.
Right,
is
exactly.
I mean, you look at the development on the west side of Madison; it's just absolutely booming.
Right, and that's real economic development. And the myth that we have to just bribe was one of the most dangerous pieces of this, because a deal like this also takes that myth to the next level, and it creates a situation where now states are just in this downward spiral of doing everything they can to give all of their money over as quickly as possible. And instead of investing in our schools, instead of investing in our roads, instead of investing in the university system, in our K-12 education system, our parks, we're bribing a private company to rip us off. And for bonus, to destroy our environment. So, so I think that's the biggest thing when considering this. That's the real, there's a lot of technical stuff you get into. But the real myth of it is, this is not economic development. This is not how government should be running. This is not a good way to do business. In fact, this is one of the worst deals in history, and it sets the bar even higher to continue this sort of tragic public policy. The reality is, we need our government to invest in reducing classroom sizes, in having a better university system, and having safer streets. And and again, I'll just kind of go back to the article I wrote. I just want to kind of highlight what I said at the beginning when this all came around. The first couple sentences I wrote in my op-ed was, for the $3 billion demanded by FoxConn, we can fix every pothole in the state with Wisconsin workers. We can reduce our public school classroom sizes by hiring hundreds of new teachers, and we can reinvest in our university system. They took out $750 million. We can reinvest in the university system, put that money back, and still have a lot of money left over. But if we did that, imagine, we're reinvesting in our potholes and our infrastructure. If we filled every single pothole, not only would those Wisconsin workers spend their money in Wisconsin, and that money gets reinvested back in, people are, buy, diapers and books and whatever else, go to movies, whatever, local restaurants. But how much money and productivity would we save if we didn't have to keep fixing our axles, suspension?
Yeah.
You know what happens when we hit a tire? You got to get it realigned, all that stuff. We hit a pothole. What if we said we're going to put $4.5 billion to make our public school systems the best in the nation? How many people would be flocking to Milwaukee right now if they said, you know what, it's tough, but we want the best for our kids, and this is the top-notch, they have the great student-to-teacher ratio, they have these great outcomes, we're going to, we'll make the move, we'll make it work. We're going to, come to Wisconsin because they have the best public schools. And that was what it was like for a long time. We did have a great public school system. That was something that brought people here as long as, as well as the factory kind of system we used to have. And then last but not least, what if we reinvest in a university system? You know how many patents, how many, I mean, it's such a, and again, 15 to 1, not theoretical, we have the study, we have the numbers, 15 to 1 economic activity driver, a university system for every dollar put in. Last but not least, I just want to say that, the kind of great myth out there that, we have to keep using our government dollars, using our tax dollars to do everything but run what a government is supposed to do is just so sick and so antithetical to good governance. And Wisconsin has been a leader for many years, has been one of the progressive leaders, and we've had some of the cleanest government in the country, some of the cleanest water in the country. Now that's up for grabs. But I do think that we need to reinstate the fact that good government is something people can believe in. Good public schools, good university systems, good roads, all that, and this deal is antithetical to that. So I don't have a good note to kind of end on, but that's the reality.
Here's a good note. Here's a good note.
Let's hear it.
What can we do in the next election? Because we brought that up last week. What can we do about this deal? Because it is, I read quite a number of professional trade journals, and all across the country they're laughing at us for this deal. And so what?
Even the Chicago Tribune, I think, or sometimes maybe wrote something like, "Hey, thanks for doing this. We might get some jobs out of it, but you guys took all the risk. Thank you very much." Yeah. So what can we do about it was the question. Well, right now, it's tough because of the way the contract is written, but if we had a new governor, that would be the first start. A new governor would be able to instruct that, well, first of all, WEDC is a mess. WEDC needs a house cleaning. I mean, just look at the amount of turnover they've had since since they've started, right? Not only that, but all the scandals, buying sports cars and everything else. I mean, just Google them, please. So cleaning house with WEDC would mean a governor that actually cares about good government, as opposed to, actually that was one other thing I wanted to mention, but the WEDC situation, kind of, getting cleaned up would mean that we could more aggressively go after some of those clawback provisions, because there is quite a bit of, there's quite a bit, as I read it, of, kind of, there's a lot of space that one can be pretty lenient or not very lenient with the way that the
I referred to it, Jonathan, as Walker's laundromat.
Okay.
Yeah, for laundering money.
Laundering money, right? Gotcha.
Yeah. Because it seems like the people that get the loans are the ones that are sticking money to Walker's campaign.
That's true. That's also true. And I'll just say one other thing about this. So to answer your question, a new governor would be the first step, and the damage that we could undo, both environmentally and otherwise, would start there. Although Matt Flynn actually just spoke about how he had some kind of ideas from a legalistic standpoint that I'm not as familiar with, that could be done if we had a new governor. But I think that's the start. It's got to be a new governor.
And here's the thing: what's the prospect that the Democratic Party will run on the idea that we either have to kick them out or get control over this deal?
Yeah.
What do you think?
That's a good point. I think a lot of the gubernatorial candidates are bringing that up. But it brings me to one other quick point, and then I have two quick questions after that. I just want to say one other thing on it, which is that there was also a big myth that Walker thought this would be his ace in the hole for winning governorship back. That was like his big thing. He's like, we got this great deal this year right before the election, and all these jobs and blah blah. And if you remember, he even did his state tour on it, and he tried to get in almost every single media market in the state, and he went all over saying how great this was and signing people on it. But guess what? Pretty soon thereafter, the polling numbers came back, and he saw this was wildly unpopular. If you notice, he's not doing a media tour or victory lap across the state around this. Did you guys notice that? It's kind of stunning, the silence on it. he mentions it briefly when he has to from time to time, talk radio, when it seems a little safe space, very briefly. But truly, it's not popular. And the areas where he thought it would be most popular, it's not even that popular there. But in the rest of the state, in western Wisconsin, northern Wisconsin, even in Milwaukee, it ain't that popular. And people are waking up, and not just on the economic devastation it's doing to our state, but also on the environmental side of it. So, so the myth was he thought he could get reelected on this ace in the hole because by the time the damage was done, it'd be after the election. The reality is, people of Wisconsin are smarter than that. So it's not very popular, and they're wise to what's going on, and he's not talking about it. Yes, sir, and then number two, yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned about election. Do you think that it's very possible Scott Walker might lose his election?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think if the election were held today, he would lose to any of the top tier candidates and almost any of the candidates running. His numbers are the worst they've ever been. He's, the FoxConn, the Lincoln Hills, he's trying to cover everything up. All these scandals he's had. Going after labor, not just public sector but private sector, and I'll say this: things like the voucher expansion. People in Wisconsin really, really, really like their public schools. It's not just Milwaukee; it's all over. It's southwestern Wisconsin, it's northern Wisconsin. People like it, and in these smaller communities, they know their teachers. Yeah. They know everyone knows it's you grew
Well,
up,
it's a center of social life too in these small towns.
Or in some places, it's the only place you can get fresh water, but that's another story. Truly, these days. So basically, I would say that, yeah, I think Walker's in a lot of trouble, and a pretty big indicator of that is the fact that he's not on a victory lap. If FoxConn was a successful deal, and if it was, popular, he would be doing what politicians do, and taking credit for their stuff.
Well, he's also trying to give money away too.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah.
aren't they breaking ground there already?
Yeah, there's still some. There's still some like imminent domain. See, that's the other thing is actually kicking people out of their homes, and they're
heard about that.
Yeah, in fact, I met one of the women who's a lovely single mother.
The one that's on the news.
Yeah,
I heard about that.
Yeah, so so it's as they say, much as slip twixt the cup and the lips. But yes, sir, and then yeah.
Yeah, I had an observation and also a question. The observation is that I have a cousin who lives right across from FoxConn. She and her husband farm the whole time. That area is solid Trump.
Right.
Absolutely. And they hate Walker for what has happened because they're all farmers.
Right.
And what they're seeing is the best land in the state. This is the best farmland in the state is being paved over to them.
Yeah.
Now that's something actually I've not really heard anybody talk about, but it's a fact. The way she's 86 years old, and the way she speaks about Walker, I couldn't quite put in a polite conversation. Okay, so here's the question: where in the state budget are we going to get the I don't know what it is, $200 million a year or whatever it is? That has to go to them year after year after year.
So that's a really good question. Where is the money coming from? First off, your observation about the land is correct. And in fact, I think down there that's pretty common. That's a pretty common observation from what I've heard. Although I haven't been there as much as you, I think. But So I think that's a fair point. As far as where the money's coming from, I mean, it's general purpose revenue, meaning our schools are. It's coming out of.
Yeah, but we couldn't afford to support our university and support our schools with the present budget.
I don't agree with the premise of that statement. I would say the political will to destroy the university system was there, and therefore have a significant defunding of it, as well as try and prop up some of the private and sometimes unaccredited, university schools like Phoenix or Art Institute or something like that. No, I think there definitely was money there. It's kind of like when Walker was county executive of Milwaukee. I'd say somebody slashed the parks budget for the parks workers.
What I meant by that was that okay, in terms of political will.
Yeah.
But supposing you go into next year with the K-12 and university system in desperate need of more resources.
Sure.
But you still also have to accommodate that $200 million
Yes.
a year. I think you're not going to see the needs of the state taken care of. What you
Yes, absolutely.
and
100%.
so
No, I think that's right, and I mean, you know, and to your point, there's one other myth I didn't bring up because it was kind of getting too long, but one of the big myths was, well, we're going to pay this off in 25 years. That will not pay it off. That will be at a break-even point in 25 years, which is ridiculous as far as an ROI. First of all, return on investment for something like that. First of all, but second of all, it's not true. Because those numbers are based on 100% of the those numbers are based on the rosiest of scenarios, and on top of that, the lie that 100% of the employees are going to be coming from Wisconsin, which is not true. In fact, in this study, it said that it's likely 40 to 50% of labor, at the very least, is coming from Illinois or from other places. So, so your point is correct, but that's the problem with Walker is. You know, he's put us on the hook for this great amount in his general purpose revenue funds. There's not a dedicated funding source where it's coming from. So it's not in competition with the other funding for schools and stuff. It trumps all that. We are mandated in a way that we are not mandated, well, morally we are, but not legally mandated in the same way for other services. Does that make sense?
it does, unfortunately.
Yeah. And then I saw 1, 2, 3. Go ahead, sir.
I guess I was going to ask you if that local municipality, it was mentioned that they were going to, FoxConn was going to be expecting tax incremental financing benefits.
Mm-hmm.
And how can Mount Pleasant, a small place like that, how can they come up with that?
That's a good
I
question.
mean, to issue the bonds and,
Yeah, that's a really
take on
good
that
point.
debt service.
That's a good question. I don't know if there's a good answer to it. I don't think that this deal was done with a lot of foresight or done very well, and it puts a lot of pressure on the local municipality in all sorts of ways. It's not just the bonding, it's also the infrastructure investment that they're on the hook for. And it's also, imagine it's possible that in 10 years that's just an empty campus.
Yeah.
We've spent all that money. I mean, what kind of, remember, for example, like Janesville. Did anyone see a documentary, As Goes Janesville, that, and when that plant, I mean, this is like a hyper-condensed version of that's way bigger and way more expensive and would just break, but the obligation is still going to be there for years to come. They still, regardless, they still have to pay it off. So, yeah, I mean, it's a good point. And, ma'am?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
The money also, I think the point, I did some writing about the entrepreneurial community in Milwaukee.
Yeah.
And how they're struggling to get angel funding,
Yeah.
Early stage funding, and they're not getting as much as they could use. And there are all kinds of people talking about the university system. There are all kinds of young people coming out of the schools with degrees in engineering and business with great ideas who are struggling to get businesses off the ground. And a number of them have been successful. But if that money, that amount of money, were put into and the greatest return on investment, I understand, does not come from these large companies.
Correct.
It comes from these young companies.
Absolutely.
At Silicon Valley, they may be giants now, but when the boom occurred, they were little companies, and then they got big. And that's the idea, is that you nurture this, and you nurture it through education and then through some sort of finance. So that's one point that is against spending so much money giving so much money to this large entity. It would be better economically to spread it around to promising young companies.
Well, and just think about your point is so profound, because just think about the paradigm that we find ourselves in versus the reality of it and the myth that we as a society have allowed ourselves to buy into, which is they're so big, therefore they need more money. They're so big, they need all this money, they're huge, they need money. It doesn't really make sense to me, actually. If aliens came down but no cultural context or background, we're like, wait a second, so these huge corporations have all this money and they're like the most successful and they're like super rich, and you subsidize them heavily when the people are struggling the most and could use a leg up and could probably return the investment on a much quicker basis, and you can have more of an impact and it's more spread out. You don't get, Like, doesn't really make sense, but, you know, that's, I mean, I think your point is so well taken.
And the other economic point I want to make, and I'm not an expert, Kevin Schaefer probably would be better off talking about this one. I do understand that the LCD manufacturing process, these are going to be giant screens that they're making. And I've read about their operations in China, they involve heavy metals.
Yes.
And that is and I know one is chromium, I'm not sure what all the different chemicals are, but this can be treated. But this is an expensive process to treat.
It's very expensive to treat these sorts of heavy metals, and it's not, and again, why would you want to get around the environmental protections that we have?
Yes, it was such a ridiculous, we look like desperados, like, you know, we don't have any, we don't have
What do you mean by that?
But just
Desperate folks.
Oh, desperate, yeah.
We're desperate to,
I thought Desperado was like a mercenary that had like the bandoliers and stuff.
Well, maybe.
I might have seen too many movies.
I
but I feel like we did get robbed, to be fair. So, yeah.
So, but I mean, we are giving away everything to get this company that is of, you know, there are some big questions about it.
Big questions.
It was a bad business deal, and then there's some serious environmental
Absolutely.
things.
Well,
if our lake is our water source, okay. But our lake is also, we have 23 million tourists in Milwaukee, York County. All of these lake communities have thriving tourist meccas. If anything happens to our lake, that could be a huge economic deficit to many different communities all along Lake Michigan.
Oh yeah, and on top of that, the generations to come. I mean, we have benefited. Yeah, it's so. Yeah, I mean, I would say that that's very well taken. Although. You know, it's such a sick, you know, it's such a ridiculous deal at so many levels. It's so bad. It's almost like cartoonishly, super villainly, you know, bad. But there could be some lawsuits that go through. But I want to get to your question.
I have two questions. Is it possible to stop this deal at this point?
I don't know if it's possible to stop the deal at this point. We can dent it and we can make it less bad. But we would need the political will. We would need a new governor and probably a new legislature. But I mean, I would say this: I'm sure there's lots of good things that could be done if the will was there. Politics is just, I mean, people think politics is like a special thing, and people have a certain job title or something like that, something special. It's just decisions being made by people that we grant certain authorities to, and decisions made by them can be unmade. You know, it's just that's all it is, right?
So would you go into some of the dents that could happen if there isn't a change in the leadership in the state?
If there is a change?
If there is, yeah.
I would say again, the first things that come to mind is more aggressive, handling of the clawback provisions, because there is. The way that I read the legislation is there's quite a bit of discretion given, and right now with Weedick and with Walker, you know, that discretion is not, you know, but
exercised.
Well, yeah, it's not exercised in the favor of the people of Wisconsin for sure.
Yeah.
So I think that, you know, that's probably the first thing that comes to mind. But it's I don't know. We'd have to look into it, and I think I'm sure. There could be some pretty good opportunities, and there might even be some legal challenges. But first off, I would think there certainly are legal. There certainly probably is a legal route on the environmental side, which is probably why they circumvented the courts. You guys know about that? The lower, you know, well, why would that be? Because the Supreme Court is bought and paid for already. So why would they need to circumvent the lower courts to get rid of the Supreme Court? Well, you know, so I think that there's a lot of. I'm not a lawyer, even though I get called one a lot. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm sure that there are options out there that have not yet been explored. But we'd have to have a new governor, and probably a new legislature would be very helpful. And you had a second question?
Yeah, messaging. If there are things in the Chicago Tribune, or in the San Francisco Chronicle, or in the New York Times, or the Washington Post, where people are laughing at us because we're, quote, cheeseheads, we're more than cheeseheads, or we're less than cheeseheads, I would say.
Yeah.
What kind of messaging is out there nationally And is it possible to bring that messaging to some place, a central place where it can be sent out, you know?
Well, I would say, so I actually have an ask for everyone here and everyone watching online as well. I would like to see some action come from tonight. So under normal circumstances, this sort of thing would be grounds for impeachment. Like under normal circumstances, especially in Wisconsin, clean government, clean water, this will get you kicked out of office.
Yeah.
This is a huge deal. We've been lulled into this, like, you know, things have gotten so bad that we're willing to
fear
or whatever, we're accepting this, but truly that's not normal. This isn't normal. We're in a very abnormal situation. This deal is not normal, not only because it sets the highest precedent for corporate bribery of this nature that we've seen, but also because this ain't how Wisconsin works. This is not us. This is abnormal. This is a unique little blip in the, you know, history of our state, if you look back at our state's government's history. So, therefore, I think it's incumbent upon everyone here who's interested in this topic, who's listening, to not only keep hammering on this, but write some op-eds. Everyone here, based on just the stuff we talked about tonight, everyone here could find a unique topic or unique vantage point, try not bad to say, this is the worst deal in the state's history, and we got to do something to kick this guy out of office. And if everyone here in a paper wrote that, that would have a pretty big effect. But conversely, if we just allow this to be as like normal and we kind of normalize it by not doing stuff, well then it's going to keep going on and it's probably going to keep getting worse.
Well,
so
impeachment is up to us.
So I would ask if let me ask you all and everyone watching, is everyone here willing to or partner up? Would you guys be willing to write an op-ed or a letter to the editor or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna go to the hearing down in Racine.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. Good.
I was there tonight.
And I think that Louise's point about curating, trying to curate sort of national coverage, commentary that comes from outside the community, could be very powerful tools in crafting op-eds.
Google it up. It's all there.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot that's there.
You can go on to. There's a newspaper database.
Oh, Nexus.
Well, there's something on the UWM website that I know about that's just for newspapers and magazines and journals. So you can.
Yeah. You have to be.
But if everyone here commits to doing that, and it's doable, the information is out there for sure. But if everyone here actually commits to it tonight and says, I am going to partner up with someone, or I'm going to do it myself, and write something, that would be significant. Because you look at it, you know, what FoxConn is claiming to do is what actually you can do, which is, and what you're doing right now by operating that camera, and what you're doing by Facebooking Live, and, you know, is be a force multiplier. I mean, I can have my effect and say my thing, I'm one person, I could vote, I'm going to vote in the election, and one person, one vote, that's fine. But I can also like come to stuff like this when I probably should be at home with my wife and doing all that stuff. But I can come to stuff like this and speak to groups and talk to other interested parties, and that's the one thing I can do to help, because we're spreading the message on this stuff. Or I can go on TV, which I've done, or write op-eds, whatever. And believe me, if I can write an op-ed, you can write an op-ed. I'm sure you're much stronger writer than me. You know, all you know, been at this for a long time. You know what the issue, you're passionate about it, something you care very much about. I very much am sure that you come with a unique perspective that, you know, from each other that's really helpful on this, but and in your own words, but if everyone, you know, and it doesn't just have to be Journal Sentinel, it could be Urban Milwaukee, could be the North Shore Patch, Shore Express, there's all these other ones I'm forgetting now, because it's been a long day, but
next door stuff,
all that stuff, you know, and you can submit it to other places too, because, you know, and you might have friends who live down there who could write op-eds that you could contact as well. But if everyone here committed to that, that's how we can say this ain't normal. This is not our Wisconsin. Our Wisconsin's clean government, you know, public schools, public universities, clean water. This ain't our Wisconsin. It's not normal. But it's incumbent upon all of us who are passionate about and care about this stuff to do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
And you do Facebook. If you do Facebook, you know, talk about it on Facebook.
Absolutely.
You know, as much as you can.
And when you publish it, you can also publish it on your Facebook page. And I got time for one last question, then I really got to bounce. But go ahead, sir. Yes.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the messaging business, and I'm really thinking about the Democratic Party and messaging. And one thing, Louise and I talk about this, is I don't think the Democrats do a very good job with messaging. And I'm not sure actually how you manage to do a better job, but I think something like this is something that ought to be coordinated throughout the entire state, and we ought to be hearing about it however you want to do it.
Well,
I get circulated.
Martha Landing is the head of the Democratic Party now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she got elected because of Grassroots North Shore, right?
Yeah, we endorsed her. Yeah, we endorsed her.
She's a huge fan of the model, and it's been very influential. And she not only, as opposed to her predecessor, she embraced it and said, "This is, we should be working with groups like this, right?"
Yeah, right.
So it sounds like you've got a pretty direct line to the top person at the party. Not only that, by writing op-eds, by getting your message out there, and by coming with whatever messaging you think is best or is most helpful, you're it's like you don't got to ask for permission. You don't got to like ask.
No, I understand that. But I honestly think that this is where the Republicans just, on a national basis and so on, are so good at deciding this is going to be what we are messaging, and that's it.
Well, that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing here. Yeah.
It's stuck every place. Whereas in this election, for example, I think in Wisconsin, the FoxConn thing is just devastating. And I think you made a case for that. That might be one of 2 or 3 things that the Democratic Party and all of the individuals who are running and so forth, besides their idiosyncratic, things that are going on in their own district. But those are the things that you just start pounding on right now.
Yeah.
And
well, I'll tell you something. If we had 9 more, 12 more, 15 more op-eds come out about this the next couple of weeks, it'd be very helpful for those efforts. And it would drive the conversation that way. And the politicians running for governor or whatever other offices, they take the cue from the public. They say, Walker is not campaigning on this because they ain't popular. If it were popular, if people loved it, he'd be campaigning. That's how it works. So your work is going to directly feed into that, and the work of people watching tonight and other stuff. That's how it works. You know what I'm saying?
Who's running the Assembly campaign, by the way? Well, I mean, a member of the Assembly would be running the Assembly camp, just like Peter Barker used to run it, I think.
Oh, who's the head of the Assembly Dems is chaired by Gordon Hintz. He's the head of the Assembly Dems.
From Oshkosh.
He's out of Oshkosh, but he was actually right there. There's another piece that just came out talking about the diversion of you guys probably read that, of the roads, so that and local
fund,
correct, the local road funding being directed to FoxConn, but so anyway, so expect some more stuff from that. But yeah, he's up on it. He's very passionate about it. He was also a former member of Joint Finance, so he's got a good mind for this sort of strategy. But don't rely on that. Don't take it easy.
Sure.
Keep your foot on the gas pedal. You drive the message. You know what's up. Not just you. I'm not picking on you. I'm saying all of you. And truly, I think all the best strategists in the world, the most expensive consultant. You know who had the most expensive consultants in the world? Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
She didn't win.
Oh.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Nothing against her, but I'm just saying, like, that's whatever. I think, people like yourselves who are active, who are in the community, doing the work, got your foot on the ground, organizations like Grassroots North Shore, that's what's up. And now we're in a more democratized, small d democratized time than ever.
Yeah.
We can get information out there. You can get your message. You can write stuff and people will pick it up. We have more public.
You can also write for Grassroots North Shore because that goes out. We go out to 3,500 people. So that's another way to get the message out.
Absolutely. I gotta run.
And we're very happy that you're able to do this tonight.
Thank you all very much.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for